The thunder rolled across the Montana Territory as Owen McCabe rode into Central City, the blood of his wounds mingling with the rain that pounded against his shoulders. The year was 1878, and he had nothing left, not his family, not his ranch, and certainly not his faith. The cross that once hung around his neck had been buried along with his wife and child 3 months prior. The main street was a river of mud, and Owen's horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Penny, trudged through it with the same weary determination that kept her rider upright in the saddle. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his side where a bullet had grazed him during an ambush 2 days back. He'd been running ever since the tragedy. Running from memories, running from God, running from the men who'd taken everything. As Owen neared the town's only hotel, his vision blurred. The last thing he saw before sliding from his saddle was a woman with copper-colored hair rushing out of the general store, her arms outstretched to catch him as darkness claimed him. Grace Zimmerman had never intended to stay in Central City. At 26, she had planned to continue west to San Francisco, where her aunt had promised her a position as a teacher. But 3 months in this mining town had stretched into 6, and now almost a year had passed. The small medical practice she'd established had become essential to the townspeople, who had few options for care beyond the drunken doctor who passed through once a month. "He's lost a fair amount of blood," Grace explained to Sheriff Daniels as they carried the unconscious stranger up to her rooms above the general store. "But the wound itself isn't deep." "Any idea who he might be?" the sheriff asked, settling the man onto Grace's examination table. "None," she replied, already cutting away the blood-soaked shirt. "But he's been riding hard for days, judging by the state of him and his horse." The sheriff nodded. "I'll check his saddlebags, see if there's any identification. You want me to fetch Doc Williams?" Grace shook her head, her copper hair escaping its pins. "He left for Denver yesterday. Besides, I can handle a bullet graze." After the sheriff departed, Grace worked methodically, cleaning the wound at the man's side and stitching it with practiced precision. His face was handsome beneath the grime and stubble's strong features, a firm jaw darkened with several days' growth of beard. But it was the emptiness she glimpsed when his eyes briefly fluttered open that struck her most deeply. She had seen that look before, in her father's eyes after Mother died, and in her own reflection for the years that followed. It was the look of someone who'd lost their way. Owen awoke to the sensation of cool fingers against his forehead. The room was unfamiliar clean, with simple furnishings and the scent of herbs in the air. He tried to sit up but fell back with a groan. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a woman's voice cautioned. "Those stitches are fresh." He turned his head to find the copper-haired woman from the street sitting beside the bed. She was prettier than his fevered mind had registered, freckles dusted across fair skin, green eyes that reminded him of the mountain meadows back home. "Where am I?" His voice was rough from disuse. "My room's above Heller's General Store. I'm Grace Zimmerman." She offered him a cup of water, supporting his head as he drank. "And you are?" "Owen McCabe." He didn't elaborate further. "Well, Mr. McCabe, you've been unconscious for nearly 2 days. That wound was infected and you had a high fever." She replaced the cup on the bedside table. "Sheriff Daniels found some papers in your saddlebags. Said you're from Sweetwater Valley, about 100 miles east of here." Owen's jaw tightened. "I was." Grace noted the past tense but didn't press. "Your horse is being well cared for at the livery. She was nearly as exhausted as you." "Thank you." The words felt foreign on his tongue. Gratitude was something he'd forgotten how to feel. "Are you hungry? I can bring you some broth." Owen shook his head, then immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his temple. "No, I just need to rest, then I'll be on my way." Grace raised an eyebrow. On your way to where, Mr. McCabe? The question hung in the air, unanswered because Owen had no answer to give. 3 days passed before Owen was strong enough to stand without assistance. Grace had proven to be both an attentive caregiver and a stubborn one, refusing to let him leave until she deemed him fit for travel. Each day, she would check his wound, bring him meals, and attempt conversation that he rebuffed with terse replies or silence. On the 4th morning, Owen was surprised to find not Grace but a young boy of about 10 waiting when he awoke. "Miss Grace said to tell you breakfast is ready downstairs if you're feeling up to it," the boy announced. "I'm Tobias, but everyone calls me Toby. Miss Grace lets me help around her practice sometimes. She's a doctor." Owen asked, pulling on the clean shirt Grace had provided, one that had belonged to her father. She'd explained. Toby shrugged. "Not officially, I guess, but she knows more about medicine than anyone else around here. She fixed my arm when I broke it falling from Jenkins' hay loft, and she delivered the Thompson twins last winter, and she—" "I get the picture," Owen interrupted, uncomfortable with the boy's admiring chatter. Downstairs, he found a small but tidy dining room adjacent to what was clearly a medical examination room. Grace was setting plates on the table, her hair tied back with a ribbon that matched the blue of her simple dress. "Good morning," she greeted him with a smile. "I thought you might be tired of eating in bed." Owen nodded, taking a seat at the table. "Thank you for your care, Miss Zimmerman. I'll be leaving today." The smile faded from Grace's face. "That would be unwise, Mr. McCabe. Your wound is healing nicely, but you're still weak. And besides—" She hesitated. "Besides what?" "Sheriff Daniels received a telegraph yesterday. There are men looking for you, 3 riders asking questions in towns east of here. They don't sound like lawmen." Owen's hand tightened around the fork he'd just picked up. "All the more reason for me to move on." "And go where?" Grace asked, echoing her question from days before. "You're in no condition to outrun anyone." Before Owen could respond, the front door opened, and Sheriff Daniels himself entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Mornin', Grace. McCabe, good to see you on your feet." The sheriff was a stocky man in his 40s, with a graying mustache and eyes that missed nothing. "Mind if I have a word?" James was just about to eat breakfast, Grace protested. "This won't take long." Daniels turned to Owen. "Those men I mentioned to Grace, they're saying you killed a man back in Sweetwater. Care to tell me if that's true?" Owen met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "I killed the man who murdered my wife and son, and I'd do it again." Grace's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room for several heartbeats. "I figured it was something like that," Daniels said finally. "The telegraph didn't mention a wife and child. Just said you gunned down Edward Blackburn in cold blood and his brothers want justice." "Blackburn," Owen spat the name. "Their idea of justice is finishing what Edward started, taking my land for the copper deposits they found on it." The sheriff studied Owen for a long moment. "I don't have any official warrant for your arrest, McCabe. Far as I'm concerned, you're just a wounded traveler passing through, but those men will be here within a day or two by my reckoning. Then I'll be gone by nightfall." "No," Grace said firmly, surprising both men. "You won't." "Miss Zimmerman," Owen began, but she cut him off. "You'll stay right here, Mr. McCabe. I have a proposal for you." She turned to the sheriff. "James, what if Mr. McCabe were working for me? A respectable position in town might give those men pause." Daniels scratched his chin. "Might at that. Hard to paint a man as a cold-blooded killer when he's helping the town's healer." "I don't need your protection," Owen said stiffly. "Perhaps not," Grace replied, "but I need help. Dr. Williams visits less frequently these days, and I can't manage all the patients alone. You could earn your keep while you recover, and by the time you're strong enough to truly move on, those men might have lost interest. Owen looked from Grace to the sheriff and back again. "I'm no doctor, but you have strong hands and, I suspect, experience with injuries. That's all I need." Her green eyes held his, challenging. "Unless you'd prefer to die in the wilderness from reopened wounds or at the hands of vengeful brothers." It was the most impractical, absurd suggestion Owen had heard, and yet he found himself without a better alternative. "1 week," he conceded finally. "Then I'm moving on, regardless." Grace smiled triumphantly. "We'll see about that, Mr. McCabe." Owen's first day as Grace's assistant proved more challenging than he'd anticipated. The morning began with a miner suffering from a crushed hand, followed by an elderly woman with a persistent cough, and a young mother worried about her infant's fever. Grace moved between patients with confidence and compassion, her hands gentle but sure. She explained treatments clearly, offered reassurance where needed, and somehow managed to guide Owen through his role without making his inexperience obvious to the patients. "Hold the bandage here," she instructed as they wrapped the miner's hand. "Firm pressure, but not too tight." Owen complied, marveling at how different her hands were from his own, smaller, certainly, but no less capable. His were rough from years of ranch work, scarred from breaking horses and mending fences. Hers were smooth but strong, with calluses that spoke of her own kind of labor. "You're good at this," he remarked later as they prepared herbs for a tincture. "Where did you learn medicine?" Grace measured dried leaves on a small scale. "My father was a doctor in St. Louis. I grew up assisting him and reading his medical texts. When he died, I continued my education however I could through books, correspondence with other doctors, practical experience." "And you ended up here," Owen observed, handing her the bottle she reached for. "I was heading to San Francisco originally," she admitted. "But the stagecoach broke an axle outside Central City, and while waiting for repairs, I treated a child with croup. Word spread, and suddenly I had patients. The town needed someone with medical knowledge. So you stayed." Grace nodded. "For now. What about you, Mr. McCabe, before?" "Everything. What was your life in Sweetwater Valley?" Owen's expression closed off immediately. "Ranching. Nothing more to tell." "I doubt that's true," Grace said quietly, but she didn't push further. That evening, as they shared a simple supper of stew and cornbread, a frantic knocking at the door interrupted their meal. Owen opened it to find a frightened young man, hat in hand. "Miss Zimmerman, please, it's my pa. His chest pains are back, worse than before." Grace was already gathering her medical bag. "Where is he, Timothy?" "At home. Ma sent me running." "I'll come with you," Owen said, reaching for his coat. Grace hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Bring the lantern. We might be late returning." The Petersons' cabin was on the outskirts of town, a modest dwelling that housed a family of 6. Inside, they found Mr. Peterson propped up in bed, his face gray with pain, his breathing labored. Mrs. Peterson hovered nearby, her hands twisted in her apron, while their younger children peered anxiously from the doorway. Grace took charge immediately, examining the patient while gently questioning him about the pain. Owen held the lantern, providing light as she listened to Peterson's chest with her stethoscope. "Your heart is straining, Mr. Peterson," she explained. "I'm going to give you something to ease the pain and help you rest, but you need complete bed rest for at least a week." "A week?" Peterson protested weakly. "The crops can wait," his wife interrupted firmly, "or the boys and I will manage." Grace prepared a tincture, then turned to Owen. "Mr. McCabe, could you help me sit him up more? He'll breathe easier." Owen set down the lantern and moved to support the man, noting how slight Peterson felt beneath his hands. The rancher couldn't have been much older than Owen's 32 years, but illness had wasted him. as they worked together to settle Peterson more comfortably. Owen found himself watching Grace, the sure movements of her hands, the calm in her voice as she gave instructions to the family, the quiet authority she commanded despite her youth. It was a stark contrast to the helplessness he had felt watching his own wife slip away after childbirth, unable to do anything but pray to a God who didn't answer. They stayed until Peterson's breathing eased and he drifted into sleep. Walking back to town in the moonlight, Owen finally broke the silence between them. "You couldn't save him, could you?" Grace's steps faltered slightly. "Mr. Peterson, his heart is failing. I can ease his suffering, perhaps extend his time by enforcing rest, but—" She shook her head. "No, I can't save him." "Then why bother?" The words were harsh, but his tone held genuine confusion rather than judgment. "Because every day matters, Mr. McCabe. Every moment of comfort, every extra hour with his family, it all matters." She looked up at him, her face pale in the moonlight. "Just because we can't save someone from death doesn't mean we shouldn't try to save them from suffering." Owen had no response to that. The weight of his own failures pressed down on him, the memory of holding his wife's hand as she bled out despite the doctor's efforts, of burying his infant son who never drew a proper breath. What good had his desperate prayers done then? "You lost faith in more than just people, didn't you?" Grace asked softly, as if reading his thoughts. Owen's jaw tightened. "I lost faith in a God who lets good people die while the wicked prosper. And yet you're still here, still walking, still helping others despite your pain." Her voice was gentle but firm. "That requires a kind of faith too, Mr. McCabe." "No," he replied bitterly. "That requires survival instinct, nothing more." Grace stopped walking, forcing him to stop as well, and turned to face her. "Then why did you kill Edward Blackburn?" she asked. "If you truly believed in nothing, you would have let him take what he wanted." Owen felt as if she'd struck him. "He murdered my family. And you risked everything to avenge them. That's not survival, Mr. McCabe. That's love. And love requires faith that some things matter more than our own preservation." She resumed walking, leaving Owen standing in the moonlight, her words echoing in his mind long after they returned to the quiet of her rooms above the general store. The next morning, Owen awoke to an empty house and a note from Grace explaining she had gone to check on Mr. Peterson. He used the time alone to finally examine his own healing wound properly, pleased to find the inflammation receding. His strength was returning, though not as quickly as he would like. He was making coffee when the front door opened, but instead of Grace, Sheriff Daniels entered, his expression grim. "They're here," he said without preamble. "The Blackburn brothers rode into town about an hour ago." Owen's hand instinctively moved to his hip where his gun would normally be holstered. "Where's Grace?" "Still out at the Petersons, far as I know." Daniels removed his hat. "I've put the word out that you're working for her, laid the groundwork that you're a respectable man helping our town's healer. But Roy and William Blackburn aren't likely to care about that." "No," Owen agreed, pouring coffee for them both. "They won't." "I can't arrest them without cause," the sheriff continued, accepting the cup. "And I can't protect you round the clock, but I thought you should know they're asking questions at the saloon, describing you to folks." Owen nodded, his mind racing. The smart move would be to leave immediately, draw the Blackburns away from town. But the thought of Grace returning to find him gone, perhaps even encountering the brothers herself, made his stomach knot. "I appreciate the warning," he said finally. "I'll handle it." Daniels eyed him skeptically. "By handle it, I hope you don't mean adding to the body count." "No," Owen assured him, though he wasn't entirely certain himself. "But I won't hide either." After the sheriff left, Owen busied himself organizing Grace's medical supplies, a task she had begun teaching him the previous day. Each bottle and packet had its place, each instrument a specific purpose. The methodical work helped calm his thoughts, giving him time to consider his options. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear Grace return until she spoke from the doorway. "This is a pleasant surprise." He turned to find her watching him, a small smile on her lips despite the weariness in her eyes. "How is Peterson?" he asked, setting down the jar of dried mint he'd been labeling, resting more comfortably. "His wife is ensuring he follows my instructions to the letter." She hung up her shawl. "You've been busy, I see." Owen gestured to the newly organized shelves. "Seemed like a useful way to learn what everything is." "Indeed." Grace moved closer, inspecting his work. "Very thorough." "The Blackburns are in town," he said abruptly, watching her face carefully. "Sheriff Daniels came by to warn me." Grace stilled, her hand hovering over a row of tinctures. "I see." She turned to face him fully. "What are you going to do?" "I haven't decided." It was the truth, though not the whole truth. Part of him had already resolved to leave as soon as possible, to draw the danger away from her and this town that had shown him unexpected kindness. "Then let me help you decide." Grace's voice was calm but determined. "You'll stay right here and continue helping me. We'll face this together." Owen shook his head. "This isn't your fight." "Perhaps not originally," she conceded, "but I've made it mine by choosing to help you, unless you think I'm incapable of making my own decisions." The challenge in her tone made him smile despite himself. "I wouldn't dare suggest it." "Good." She removed her apron from its hook. "Now we have patients arriving at noon. The Wilkins children need their vaccinations and Mrs. Edgerton is coming for her arthritis tonic." Owen marveled at her composure. "You're not afraid?" Grace paused in tying her apron. "Of course I am." "But fear doesn't help patients, Mr. McCabe, and it doesn't solve problems." She looked at him directly. "Besides, Central City has a capable sheriff, and I have faith that good will prevail over vengeance." "Faith," Owen repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "Yes, faith." She finished with her apron and began laying out clean instruments. "If you've lost yours, then I'll believe enough for both of us until you find it again." The simple declaration stunned Owen into silence. In that moment, watching Grace prepare for her day's work with quiet determination despite knowing dangerous men were seeking him out, he felt something shift within him, not faith returning, perhaps, but a crack in the wall he'd built around himself since burying his family. 2 days passed with no direct confrontation from the Blackburn brothers, though Owen spotted them watching Grace's building from the saloon across the street. He kept to his duties, assisting Grace with patience and learning more about her healing practices, all while maintaining a vigilant awareness of his surroundings. On the third evening, as a spring thunderstorm rolled over the mountains, the inevitable finally occurred. Owen was closing up the practice while Grace prepared dinner upstairs when the front door opened, admitting 2 men whose resemblance to Edward Blackburn was unmistakable, the same cold eyes, the same cruel set to their mouths. "Well, well," the taller one, Roy, Owen presumed, drawled. "Fancy finding you playing nurse, McCabe. Quite a step down from ranching, isn't it?" Owen straightened, keeping the examination table between them. "State your business and get out. Miss Zimmerman doesn't need trouble in her practice." "Our business." William, the broader of the two, laughed harshly. "Our business is you, McCabe. You murdered our brother." "After he murdered my wife and child," Owen replied evenly. "Or did that detail slip your minds?" Roy's hand moved to rest on his holstered gun. "Eddie always said your land was wasted on you. Said you didn't appreciate its true value. So that justified killing my family." Owen's voice remained controlled, but rage burned just beneath the surface. "Get out. Whatever you came to do, I won't make it easy for you. We didn't come to do anything right away, Roy said, smiling thinly. Just wanted to let you know we're watching. Wouldn't want to disrupt the fine doctor's practice with bloodshed, after all. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Grace's arrival before she appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from curiosity to wariness as she took in the scene. "Gentlemen," she said coolly, "we're closed for the day. If you need medical attention, you can return tomorrow during office hours." William's gaze raked over her appreciatively. "No medical attention needed, madam. Just having a friendly chat with your assistant here." "I see." Grace moved to stand beside Owen, her presence steady and unafraid. "Well, as I said, we're closed, and Mr. McCabe is needed upstairs." "Mr. McCabe." Roy's smile widened unpleasantly. "Is that what you call the man who gunned down our brother? You know what he is, lady, a killer, nothing more." Grace met his gaze unflinchingly. "I know exactly who Mr. McCabe is. He's a man who has suffered tremendous loss and still chooses to help others. Now, I'll ask you once more to leave my establishment." The brothers exchanged glances, clearly not having expected such resistance from the small, copper-haired woman. "We'll go," Roy said finally. "But this isn't over, McCabe, not by a long shot." He tipped his hat mockingly to Grace. "Evening, madam." After they left, Owen turned to Grace, anger and concern warring in his expression. "You shouldn't have confronted them." "And you shouldn't underestimate me," she retorted, though her hands trembled slightly now that the danger had passed. "I grew up with 3 brothers and a father who taught me to stand my ground. These aren't schoolyard bullies, Grace. The Blackburns won't hesitate to hurt you if it serves their purpose." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it seemed to catch them both by surprise. Grace recovered first, meeting his gaze steadily. "All the more reason for us to stick together, Owen." She said his name deliberately, marking the shift between them. "Now, dinner's getting cold, and I don't know about you, but confronting murderous land grabbers has given me quite an appetite." Despite everything, Owen found himself smiling as he followed her upstairs. The woman was either the bravest or the most foolhardy person he'd ever met. Perhaps both. That night, long after Grace had retired to her bedroom, Owen sat by the window watching the street below. The saloon across the way was still lit, shadows moving behind its windows. The Blackburns would be planning their next move, perhaps recruiting local troublemakers to their cause. His gaze shifted to the church at the end of the street, its steeple silhouetted against the night sky. Once, he would have sought solace there, would have knelt and prayed for guidance. Now the sight of it only reminded him of the futility of faith, of the prayers that had gone unanswered as his wife bled out in their bed, their newborn son already still and cold beside her. Yet Grace's words from days earlier lingered in his mind. "If you've lost your faith, then I'll believe enough for both of us." What kind of woman offered such a thing to a stranger? What kind of strength did it take to maintain faith in the face of suffering, to believe in something beyond the cruel realities of this world? As if summoned by his thoughts, Grace's door opened, and she emerged wearing a dressing gown over her nightclothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I thought you might still be awake," she said softly, moving to stand beside him at the window. "Watching for them," Owen nodded. "They won't wait long to make their move. What will you do when they do?" It was the question he'd been asking himself for days. The answer had once seemed simple: kill or be killed. But now, standing in this quiet room with Grace beside him, the prospect of more bloodshed felt hollow. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been running and fighting for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to do anything else." Grace was silent for a moment, her gaze on the darkened street. "My father used to say that the hardest part of healing isn't the wound itself, but learning to live with the scar." Wise man. He was. She turned to face him, her expression earnest in the lamplight. Owen, whatever you decide to do about the Blackburns, know that there's a place for you here. Not just hiding or waiting, but living, helping, being part of something again. The offer stunned him. You barely know me, I know enough. Her hand moved to rest lightly on his arm. I know you're a man who loved deeply enough that losing that love nearly destroyed you. I know you have gentle hands despite their strength. I know you listen when patients speak, really listen, which is rarer than you might think. Owen looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. I'm not the man you think I am, Grace. I've done things, we've all done things, she interrupted, but we don't have to be defined by them. Her voice softened. The question is, what will you do next? Before he could answer, a crash from below startled them both. Owen moved instantly, pushing Grace behind him as he reached for the rifle he'd kept nearby. Stay here, he ordered, moving toward the stairs. But Grace was already reaching for her medical bag. If someone's hurt, Grace, please. The urgency in his voice stopped her. Let me check first. She nodded reluctantly, and Owen descended the stairs silently, rifle at the ready. The front window of the practice had been shattered, glass littering the floor. In the center of the examination room, a burning torch had been thrown, flames already catching on the curtains. Owen moved quickly, stamping out the torch and pulling down the burning curtains, smothering them with a blanket kept for patients. Only when the immediate danger was past did he notice the paper wrapped around the torch's handle. Unfolding it, he found a crude drawing of a hanging man with McCabe written beneath it. Grace gasped behind him, and he turned to find her at the foot of the stairs, taking in the destruction. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, moving toward him. "No," he assured her, but couldn't hide the paper fast enough. Grace took it from his hand, her face paling as she understood its meaning. "This is a threat." "Yes. Not just against you," she said, looking around at her vandalized practice. "Against anyone who helps you." Owen's jaw tightened with anger and guilt. "I'll leave at first light, draw them away from here." "No," Grace's voice was firm. "That's exactly what they want, to isolate you, to make you vulnerable." She crumpled the paper in her fist. "We're going to the sheriff. At this hour." "Yes, at this hour." She was already moving to retrieve her shawl. "And then we're going to board up this window and clean this mess, together." Owen stared at her, marveling at the determination in her slight frame. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." A smile flickered across her face despite the circumstances. "I'll take that as a compliment, Mr. McCabe." Sheriff Daniels was not pleased to be awakened in the middle of the night, but his annoyance quickly turned to anger when he saw the vandalism to Grace's practice and the threatening note. "This crosses a line," he growled, examining the broken glass. "Threatening a woman, destroying property, that's more than a personal vendetta. That's criminal behavior I can act on." "What will you do?" Grace asked, wrapping her shawl more tightly around herself in the cool night air. "First light, I'll gather some deputies and pay the Blackburns a visit at their hotel room. They'll either leave town peacefully or spend some time in my jail." Daniels turned to Owen. "But that won't solve the underlying issue. They'll just wait elsewhere, come back when I'm not watching." "I know," Owen acknowledged. "This is between them and me. It won't end until they're satisfied." "Or until they're stopped permanently," the sheriff said grimly. "I'm not advocating murder, McCabe, but you have a right to defend yourself, and this town has a right to peace." After the sheriff left, promising to send men to help secure the broken window until proper repairs could be made, Owen and Grace worked in silence to clean up the glass and smoke damage. It was nearly dawn by the time they finished, both exhausted but too wired to sleep. "You should rest," Owen told her as they sat at her kitchen table, cups of coffee between them. "I'll keep watch." Grace shook her head. I'm not sure I could sleep now anyway. She studied him over the rim of her cup. Tell me about your wife. The request caught him off guard. Why would you ask about that? Because you never speak of her except to mention her death. Grace's voice was gentle. She must have been someone special for you to love her so deeply that losing her took your faith. Owen stared into his coffee, memories rising unbidden. Her name was Sarah. We grew up together in Sweetwater Valley, married young. She was. He searched for words, finding them rusty with disuse. She was sunshine, always smiling, always finding good in everything. Even when times were hard on the ranch, she never lost hope. She sounds wonderful, Grace said softly. She was. Owen's throat tightened. When she told me she was expecting our child, it was the happiest day of my life. We'd been trying for years. Grace reached across the table, her hand covering his. I'm so sorry, Owen. The birth was difficult, he continued, the words coming easier now. The doctor said afterward there was nothing that could have been done. The baby, our son, he was positioned wrong, couldn't breathe properly. Sarah hemorrhaged. His voice broke. I prayed, God, how I prayed, but it didn't matter. And then the blackburns came, Grace prompted when he fell silent. Owen nodded, his hand unconsciously turning to hold hers. They'd been pressuring us to sell for months. Found copper on the adjacent property, thought our land might have deposits too. After Sarah and the baby died, I had no heart to fight them, but I couldn't bear to leave the home we'd built together. His expression hardened. Edward came to the house while I was digging their graves, said it was a shame about my family, but now there was nothing keeping me from selling to them. He said that while you were burying them. Grace's horror was evident. Yes, when I refused again, he left. But a week later, he returned with his brothers. They set fire to the barn, shot my best horses, said accidents happened to stubborn men. Owen's grip on her hand tightened. I should have known they'd go further, should have left then. But that ranch was all I had left of Sarah. It wasn't your fault, Grace insisted. What happened next? I caught Edward trying to poison my well. We fought. He drew on me, but I was faster. Owen met her gaze, expecting to see judgment or fear. Instead, he found only compassion. I buried him on my land, packed what I could carry, and ran. Been running ever since. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Thank you for telling me. Why? Because now I understand better. She squeezed his hand. Not just why you're running, but why you've lost your faith. You lost everything you believed in, your wife, your child, your home, your God, all at once. Owen withdrew his hand, uncomfortable with her insight. It doesn't change anything, doesn't it? Grace tilted her head, studying him. You told me your story. You let yourself remember her, not just her death, but who she was, what she meant to you. That's not nothing, Owen. Before he could respond, a knock at the door announced the arrival of the men Sheriff Daniels had promised to help secure the broken window. The moment between them passed, but Owen felt something had shifted, as if speaking Sarah's name aloud after months of silence had loosened something tight within his chest. The Blackburns' hotel room was empty when Sheriff Daniels arrived that morning. Their horses were gone from the livery, their bill paid in full. Doesn't mean they've given up, Daniels warned Owen and Grace when he delivered the news. Just means they're changing tactics. Or lying low until you stop looking for them, Owen suggested. Possibly. The sheriff frowned. I've sent telegraphs to neighboring towns to be on the lookout, but truthfully, there's not much more I can do unless they commit another crime. After he left, Owen paced the length of Grace's sitting room. I should leave. They could be watching, waiting for me to let my guard down. Grace, who had been reviewing her patient ledger, set down her pencil with a sigh. We've had this conversation, Owen. Running won't solve anything. Staying puts you in danger. I'm already in danger, she pointed out. They know I've helped you. Leaving now won't change that. Owen stopped pacing to look at her. "Why are you so determined to stand with me in this? You could have sent me on my way as soon as I was well enough." Grace met his gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, because you deserve justice, not persecution, and because—" She hesitated. "Because I care what happens to you." The admission hung in the air between them, simple but profound. "You shouldn't," Owen said finally, his voice rough. "I'm not worth it. That's not for you to decide." Grace rose from her chair, moving to stand before him. "Every life has worth, Owen McCabe. Even yours, though you seem determined to believe otherwise." He shook his head, unable to accept the absolution she offered so freely. "You don't know all the things I've done." "I know enough," she insisted. "I know you've suffered. I know you've killed in defense of yourself and in vengeance for those you loved. And I know you've helped save lives these past weeks, working alongside me." She reached up, her hand resting against his cheek. "I see you, Owen, all of you." The touch of her hand, the conviction in her voice, the unwavering acceptance in her eyes, it was too much. Owen stepped back, breaking the contact. "You see what you want to see," he said harshly. "A man worth saving, but I stopped believing in salvation the day I buried my wife and son." Grace's hand fell to her side, but her gaze never wavered. "Then I'll believe for both of us," she said simply, echoing her words from days before. "Until you remember how." The next week passed in uneasy vigilance. Though no sign of the Blackburns was detected in or around Central City, Owen maintained a constant watch, accompanying Grace on her house calls and insisting on securing the practice thoroughly each night before they retired upstairs. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, something was growing between them, a partnership born of shared purpose that gradually deepened into something more. Owen found himself watching Grace as she worked, admiring her quick mind and gentle hands. He began anticipating her needs before she voiced them, learning the rhythms of her practice until they moved together in seamless coordination. For her part, Grace seemed to draw him out with each passing day, coaxing stories of his life before tragedy, laughing at his dry observations, challenging him when his darker moods threatened to overwhelm him. She never pushed about faith directly, but Owen often caught her in quiet prayer before meals or at bedtime, her lips moving silently, her expression peaceful. On Sunday morning, Owen was surprised when Grace appeared dressed in her finest dress, a deep blue that brought out the green in her eyes. "Are you coming?" she asked, pinning her hat in place. "Where? To church?" She said it as if it were the most natural question in the world. Owen stared at her. "You can't be serious." "Entirely serious." Grace adjusted her gloves. "It's Sunday. I always attend services when I'm not tending to patients." "You know how I feel about church," Owen said stiffly. Grace nodded. "I do, and I would never force you to come, but I thought you might prefer to stay near me given recent events." A small smile played at her lips. For protection, of course. It was a gentle manipulation, and they both knew it. But the alternative was sitting alone in the empty rooms, imagining all manner of dangers befalling her. "Fine," he relented, reaching for his coat. "But don't expect me to participate." "I would never presume to expect anything of you, Mr. McCabe," Grace replied, her tone so prim that Owen couldn't help but chuckle. The church was the largest building in Central City, a simple white structure with a steeple that could be seen from anywhere in town. Inside, polished wooden pews faced a modest altar, sunlight streaming through plain glass windows. Most of the town seemed to be in attendance, and many nodded greetings to Grace as she led Owen to a pew near the back. Owen sat stiffly, acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Though he had been in town for weeks now, he had kept largely to Grace's practice, venturing out only when necessary. This was his first public appearance at a community gathering. "Relax," Grace whispered, placing her hand briefly on his arm. "No one's going to bite." Owen was about to retort when the minister entered, a tall man with kind eyes and silver at his temples. As the service began, Owen found himself watching Grace more than listening to the sermon. She sang the hymns in a clear, sweet voice, followed the readings attentively, and bowed her head in earnest prayer. There was no artifice in her devotion, no performance for the benefit of others. She simply believed, wholly and without reservation. It was both foreign and familiar to Owen, reminding him of Sarah's similar faith, a faith he had once shared before tragedy tore it from him. When the service ended, Grace was immediately surrounded by townspeople, many seeking her medical advice or updating her on family members she had treated. Owen stood to the side, uncomfortable with the social interactions but unwilling to leave her alone. "Mr. McCabe," a voice addressed him, and he turned to find the minister extending a hand. "I'm Reverend Thomas. I've heard much about you from Miss Zimmerman." Owen shook the offered hand cautiously. "Nothing too damning, I hope." The minister smiled. "On the contrary, she speaks highly of your assistance in her practice." His expression grew more serious. "She also mentioned your troubles. If you ever wish to talk about anything, my door is always open." "Thank you," Owen replied, surprised by the sincerity he felt. "But I'm not much for talking about such things." "Understandable." Reverend Thomas nodded. "Faith is a personal journey, especially when it's been tested by fire." Before Owen could respond, a commotion at the church entrance drew everyone's attention. Sheriff Daniels burst through the doors, his expression grim. "McCabe," he called, striding down the aisle. "The Blackburns have been spotted riding this way, 3 miles out. And they've gathered a few more men to their cause." The church erupted in murmurs of concern. Owen moved immediately to Grace's side, his hand instinctively reaching for a gun that wasn't there. He hadn't wanted to bring a weapon into the church. "How many?" he asked the sheriff. "5 total, from what my deputy could see." Daniels looked around at the assembled townspeople. "Folks, I suggest you all head home directly. No need to be in the streets if trouble's coming." As people began to disperse, many casting worried glances at Owen and Grace, Reverend Thomas stepped forward. "Sheriff, Miss Zimmerman and Mr. McCabe are welcome to shelter in the church if necessary. It's sturdy and we can secure the doors." "No," Owen said firmly. "I won't bring violence to a house of worship." He turned to Grace. "We need to get back to your practice, gather what we need, and leave town." Grace's eyes widened. "Leave? Owen, we can't just—" "We can and we will," he interrupted. "I won't have more blood on my hands, and I won't risk your life." Before she could protest further, he took her arm and began leading her from the church, nodding his thanks to the reverend as they passed. "Owen, stop." Grace pulled against his grip once they were outside. "This is madness. We can't outrun them. We can try." He continued moving toward her practice, his eyes scanning the street for signs of the approaching riders. "I should have left weeks ago." "And what then?" Grace demanded, finally wrenching her arm free. "You spend the rest of your life running. They find you eventually, or someone else does. That's not living, Owen. That's just prolonging the inevitable. Better that than bringing destruction to your doorstep." They had reached the practice, and Owen opened the door, ushering her inside. "Pack what you need. Essentials only." Grace stood in the middle of the room, making no move to comply. "I'm not going anywhere. Grace, no." Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "This is my home, my practice. These are my patients, my community. I will not be driven from them by fear." Owen ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "They will kill you to get to me. Don't you understand that?" "Of course I understand," she replied, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. But running isn't the answer. It never has been. Then what is? Owen demanded. You have all this faith, all these answers. Tell me, Grace, what would you have me do? Stand in the street and let them gun me down? Fight back and risk innocent lives in the crossfire? Grace moved toward him, her expression softening. I would have you trust that there's another way. Trust me. Trust the community that has taken you in. Owen shook his head, disbelief warring with a desperate desire to believe her. What community? I'm a stranger here. Are you? She gestured around them. You've helped heal dozens of people in this room. You've broken bread with the Petersons, delivered Mrs. Thompson's baby when I couldn't reach her in time, taught young Toby how to properly splint a broken limb. These people know you now, Owen. They see what I see. And what is that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A good man. Grace reached for his hand, holding it between both of hers. A man worth standing beside, worth believing in. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with conviction. I'm not running, Owen, and neither should you. The sound of horses approaching broke the moment. Owen moved to the window, peering out to see Sheriff Daniels organizing a group of men in the street, positioning them strategically. They're preparing to meet the Blackburns, he reported. Daniels has at least 10 men with him. Grace joined him at the window. You see, you're not alone in this. Owen turned to her, struck by the realization that she was right. Somehow, without his noticing, he had become part of something again, not just Grace's practice, but this town, these people who were now arming themselves to stand against the men hunting him. I need to be out there, he said. I can't hide while others fight my battles. Grace nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then we'll go together. No, Owen said firmly. You stay here, be ready to treat the wounded if necessary. For once, Grace didn't argue. Instead, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. Be careful. And remember what I said, I believe enough for both of us. The words echoed in his mind as Owen stepped out into the street, moving to join Sheriff Daniels and the assembled townsmen. Some he recognized as patients, others as faces from the church or saloon. All nodded to him with grim determination. Glad you decided to join us, Daniels said, handing Owen a shotgun. Thought you might try to slip away. I considered it, Owen admitted, but I'm tired of running. The sheriff clapped him on the shoulder. Good man. Now we're going to try to resolve this peacefully if we can, but if not. He left the implication hanging. They didn't have long to wait. Within minutes, 5 riders appeared at the far end of the street, dust billowing behind them as they slowed their horses to a walk. Owen recognized Roy and William Blackburn at the front, flanked by 3 rough-looking men he didn't know. The townsmen spread out across the width of the street, forming a living barrier. Owen stood beside Sheriff Daniels in the center, shotgun held ready but not aimed. The Blackburns halted their horses a dozen yards away, sizing up the opposition. Roy's face twisted in a sneer when he spotted Owen. Well, well, he called. Got yourself an army, McCabe. Didn't figure you for a man who'd hide behind others. He's not hiding, Sheriff Daniels replied before Owen could speak. And you boys are trespassing in my town after being warned to leave. William spat in the dirt. We ain't here for your town, Sheriff, just for him. He pointed at Owen. He murdered our brother. After your brother murdered his family, came a voice from behind Owen. He turned to find Reverend Thomas joining them, unarmed but resolute. The cycle of violence must end somewhere, gentlemen. Roy's hand moved to his holstered gun. It'll end when McCabe is dead. No, Owen said, stepping forward. It ends now, one way or another. He handed the shotgun back to Sheriff Daniels and moved beyond the line of townsmen, stopping in the open space between the 2 groups. I'm unarmed, Blackburn. You want to shoot me, do it now. But know that these men will cut you down the moment you do. A murmur ran through the crowd at his actions. Even the Blackburns seemed taken aback by the direct challenge. "What kind of trick is this?" Roy demanded. "No trick." Owen spread his hands to show they were empty. "Just a choice. You can kill me and die yourselves, continuing the bloodshed that has already taken too many lives, or we can end this here." "Why would we do that?" William sneered. "You killed our brother." "And he killed my wife and son," Owen replied, his voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "My pregnant wife who never harmed anyone, my newborn son who never even got to see the world, all because you wanted our land." Some of the men with the Blackburns shifted uncomfortably at this. "He's lying," Roy said quickly. "Eddie never killed no woman and baby." "I buried them with my own hands," Owen continued, addressing not just the Blackburns but everyone present, "while your brother stood over me and suggested I sell him their home." Reverend Thomas stepped forward to stand beside Owen. "If what Mr. McCabe says is true, and I believe it is, then the original sin here lies with Edward Blackburn. His death, while regrettable, was the consequence of his own actions." "This ain't no church sermon," Roy snarled, but Owen could see uncertainty in the faces of their companions. "Maybe it should be," came Grace's voice as she emerged from her practice to join Owen and the Reverend. "Maybe we all need to remember that vengeance belongs to the Lord, not to us." "Grace, get back inside," Owen urged, but she ignored him. "These men came to our town to threaten and intimidate," she addressed the crowd. "They vandalized my practice, threatened my patient, all to continue a cycle of violence that has already claimed too many lives." She turned to the Blackburns. "I didn't know your brother, but I doubt this endless pursuit of vengeance is what he would have wanted for his family." "You don't know nothing about our family," William growled, but his conviction seemed to be wavering. "I know about loss," Grace replied softly. "We all do. It's part of being human. But so is forgiveness, and the choice to build something new from the ashes of what was destroyed." Owen looked at her in wonder, marveling at her courage and her unwavering faith in the possibility of redemption. In that moment, something shifted within him, not a return to the blind faith of his youth, but a recognition that there might be purpose beyond suffering, meaning beyond loss. "Enough talk," Roy declared, his hand tightening on his gun. "We came here for justice, and we mean to have it." "Justice isn't the same as revenge," Sheriff Daniels pointed out. "And I'd say McCabe has suffered plenty already, losing his family and his home." "It ain't enough," Roy insisted, but one of his companions was already turning his horse. "I didn't sign on for a war with a whole town, Roy," the man said. "You said we was just coming for one man who killed your brother. You didn't say nothing about him having lost his wife and child to Eddie first." "Shut up, Mason," Roy hissed, but the damage was done. Another of their companions was looking uncertain now. "Is it true?" the second man asked. "Did your brother kill his family?" When neither Blackburn answered immediately, the man shook his head. "I got a wife and kids of my own. I can't be part of this." He too turned his horse. William reached for his gun, but Sheriff Daniels was faster, his rifle aimed squarely at the younger Blackburn's chest. "I wouldn't," the sheriff warned. "You're already outnumbered, and now your friends are deserting you. Be smart." For a tense moment, it seemed William might try to draw anyway. But Roy, seeing the tide turn against them, put a restraining hand on his brother's arm. "This ain't over, McCabe," he said, his voice thick with hatred. "Someday, somewhere, we'll finish this." "No," Owen said firmly. "It is over, today. Your brother took my family, and I took his life in return. The scales are balanced." He stepped closer to the mounted men. "Go home. Live your lives. Let me live what's left of mine." Something in his tone, the weariness perhaps, or the absolute certainty, seemed to finally reach the Blackburns. Roy stared at him for a long moment before spitting in the dirt. "Come on, Will," he said finally. "This town ain't worth our blood." With a final venomous glare, the brothers turned their horses and rode away, following their departed companions. The tension in the street held until they were out of sight, then released in a collective exhalation of relief. Grace was at Owen's side immediately, her hand finding his. "Are you all right?" he nodded, still processing what had just happened. "They left, just like that." "Not just like that," Sheriff Daniels corrected, joining them. "You stood your ground, spoke your truth. That took courage, McCabe." Reverend Thomas nodded in agreement. "It's no small thing to face your enemies without a weapon, to offer them a choice rather than force their hand." Owen looked down at Grace's hand in his, then back to the men who had stood with him. "I couldn't have done it alone." "No," Grace said softly, "none of us can. That's why we need each other." Her green eyes held his. "That's why faith matters, not just in God, but in people, in the possibility of redemption." As the townspeople began to disperse, clapping Owen on the shoulder or nodding their respect as they passed, he felt something unfurling within him, not a return to what was lost, but the first tentative shoots of something new. It wasn't faith, not yet. But it was a willingness to consider that Grace might be right, that there might be more to life than survival and vengeance. That night, as they sat by the fire in Grace's sitting room, Owen finally asked the question that had been on his mind since the confrontation. "Why did you come out there today? You could have been hurt." Grace looked up from her mending, her expression thoughtful. "For the same reason you gave up the shotgun, because sometimes standing together unarmed is more powerful than any weapon." "I didn't believe it would work," Owen admitted. "I expected to die today. I know." She set aside her sewing. "That's why I had to be there, to remind you that your life has value, that you're worth fighting for, worth believing in." Owen moved from his chair to sit beside her on the small sofa. "You've been saying that from the beginning, haven't you? That you believe enough for both of us." Grace nodded, her eyes steady on his. "And I meant it. What if I told you I'm starting to remember how?" Owen's voice was low, vulnerable in a way it hadn't been since before Sarah died. "Not to believe in God, necessarily. I don't know if I'll ever find my way back to that. But to believe in possibility, in tomorrow." Grace's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Then I would say that's a fine place to start." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Owen reached up to touch her face. "I don't have much to offer, Grace. I'm a broken man with enemies and a past I can't escape." "I'm not asking for much," she replied, leaning slightly into his touch. "Just for you to stay, to help me heal this town, to see where this path might lead us." "I can do that," Owen said, and for the first time in months he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. "I can try." When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, a beginning rather than a promise. Grace responded with equal tenderness, her hand coming to rest over his heart as if she could feel the broken places starting to mend. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. The Blackburns never returned to Central City, though Owen remained vigilant. With time, the watchfulness became habit rather than fear, and he found himself looking forward to each day rather than dreading what it might bring. His partnership with Grace deepened in every way. They worked side by side in her practice, their skills complementing each other, her knowledge and gentle touch, his strength and practical experience. He accompanied her on house calls, helped deliver babies and set broken bones, learned to prepare her medicines and tinctures. And in the quiet evenings, they built something neither had expected to find a home, a family of two that gradually expanded to include the townspeople who came to them for care and stayed for conversation or a shared meal. Owen never returned to church, but he sometimes waited outside for Grace, walking her home afterward and listening without resentment as she shared the message of the day. He found his own kind of faith in the work they did together, in the lives they touched, in the future they began to plan. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside the windows of what was now their shared home, Owen knelt before Grace with his mother's ring, the one possession he had managed to save when he fled his ranch. "I can't promise you an easy life," he told her, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his chest. "But I can promise to love you every day that I'm given on this earth, to build something good with you, to honor the faith you've shown in me when I couldn't find it in myself." Grace's eyes shone with tears as she took his face in her hands. "The only promise I need is that you'll stay, Owen, that you won't run when things get difficult, that you'll believe in us even when believing seems impossible." "I promise," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. When they were married in the spring, Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony under an arch of wildflowers behind their home. The entire town attended, watching as the healer and the cowboy she had saved pledged their lives to each other. "I once told you I would believe enough for both of us," Grace said in her vows, her voice clear in the mountain air. "But you've shown me that faith grows strongest when it's shared. Thank you for finding your way back to hope, to love, to me." Owen, who had once thought himself beyond redemption, looked at the woman who had seen value in him when he saw none in himself, and found the words that had eluded him for so long. "You gave me a reason to live when all I wanted was to follow my family to the grave. You showed me that loss isn't the end of the story, it's just part of a larger journey." He took her hands in his. "I don't know if I'll ever understand why they were taken from me, but I know that finding you has given my life purpose again. I may have lost my faith, but you helped me build a new one, faith in you, in us, in the good we can do together." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the townsfolk applauded, and Owen felt the last of his walls crumble. He would always carry the scars of his past, the memories of Sarah and their son, the violence that had shaped his journey. But now those scars were just part of who he was, not the whole of his identity. By the following winter, Grace was expecting their first child. Owen found himself alternating between joy and terror, the memory of his previous loss casting shadows over his happiness. But Grace, ever his anchor, held him steady through the darker moments. "This child is a gift," she reminded him one night as they lay in bed, his hand spread protectively over her growing belly. "Not a replacement for what you lost, but a new chapter altogether." "I know," Owen said, feeling the flutter of movement beneath his palm. "I just can't help being afraid." "Fear is natural," Grace assured him, "but it doesn't have to control us." She covered his hand with her own. "Remember what you told the Blackburns, that the cycle has to end somewhere. This child is part of that ending and a new beginning." When their daughter was born the following spring, a healthy, strong, lunged baby with Grace's copper hair and Owen's blue eyes, they named her Faith. Not as a declaration or a demand, but as a reminder that even in the darkest times, something new can take root and grow. As Owen held his daughter for the first time, looking down into eyes that seemed to already know him, he felt the final piece of his healing click into place. This was what Grace had meant all along, not that he needed to reclaim what was lost, but that he could build something new from the ashes. "Thank you," he whispered to his wife, who watched them from the bed with tired eyes and a radiant smile. "For what?" she asked. "For believing enough for both of us," Owen replied, "until I could find my way back to believing too." Faith grew into a curious, spirited child who followed her parents around their expanding medical practice, learning the names of herbs and watching with solemn eyes as they tended to the sick and injured. 2 years after her birth, she was joined by a brother they named Thomas, after the reverend who had stood with them against the Blackburns and who had become a true friend in the years since. Central City grew as well, the railroad bringing new residents and opportunities. Owen and Grace's practice expanded to include a proper clinic, with rooms for patients who needed overnight care. Owen never became a doctor in the formal sense, but his skills as a healer became nearly as sought after as his wife's. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Owen would find himself thinking about the long road that had led him here, the loss that had nearly destroyed him, the vengeance that had set him running, the exhaustion that had brought him to Grace's doorstep. How close he had come to missing this life entirely, to losing himself in bitterness and grief. On one such evening, as he sat on the porch watching Grace teach Faith to identify constellations in the night sky, he was struck by the realization that this was what redemption looked like, not a dramatic moment of divine intervention, but a gradual rebuilding, choice by choice, day by day. "Papa, look," Faith called, pointing upward. "The North Star. Mama says it helps people find their way home when they're lost." Owen joined them on the steps, lifting his daughter onto his lap. "Your mama is right about that, little one." Grace smiled at him over Faith's head, the love in her eyes as steady as the star they had been observing. "Some people just need a little more help finding their way than others," she said, her words carrying the weight of their shared history. "And some people are lucky enough to find someone willing to guide them," Owen replied, reaching for her hand. As Faith chatted excitedly about the stars and the stories behind them, Owen held his family close and gave silent thanks not to the God he had once worshipped and then rejected, but to the universe that had brought him to Central City when he had nothing left, to the woman who had seen value in him when he saw none in himself, and to the new faith they had built together from the broken pieces of his old one. He had been a cowboy who'd lost his faith, and she had believed enough for both of them. But now, surrounded by the family and community they had created together, Owen McCabe realized he no longer needed someone to believe for him. He had found his own way back to faith, not in divine providence or cosmic justice, but in the simple, profound truth that love could rise from the ashes of loss, that healing could follow the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage was to simply begin again.